Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Continuing with our discussion on market for technology, now we will look at the role which is played by patents in supporting and facilitating this market. We have an elaborate discussion on what patents are and how they can actually play a role in technology transfer. We have discussed about the kind of a regime that is prevalent in a particular country. If you recall our discussion on TRIPS related changes in India and how TRIPS related changes had bring harmonization of intellectual property rights in the different economies. So when we are talking about the presence of this intellectual property regime, essentially we are talking about appropriability regime. What is that appropriability regime? It refers to the protection afforded to the innovators through the legal mechanism, right? Now, here you have to understand that each country may have a different type of regime, but as we have discussed already under the TRIPS agreement, now the countries, particularly the member states of World Trade Organization, are required to make the changes as per the TRIPS agreement. But apart from the legislation which is available, let us say, or through the acts or the law, what also matters is the enforcement of that. And in that context, a lot of discussion has happened that in some countries there might be a strong protection vis-a-vis a weak protection as such. So how does that will influence the market for technology? Clearly, having a strong protection will help the inventor to delineate, to kind of draw a boundary around their intellectual property. And if the boundary is drawn specifically, it will further facilitate the transfer process. On the other hand, if the protection is rather weak and the inventor is always worried that its technology is going to be copied and imitated, then they will be not very confident with respect to transferring to the other party. So clearly, the first support which is extended by intellectual property regime in this market of technology is to draw those boundaries around the specific technology. It facilitates that, and differences in the regimes which are prevalent will then influence the efficiency of that particular market for the technology. If there is strong regime which will help the inventors to overcome the problem of the technology transfer, which problem we will specifically help is the problem of the information asymmetry. If you remember, we have discussed how information asymmetry can actually lead to a market failure in case of a technology transfer, because one party will have more information, they may not bring it forward because they will be worried that it will be copied by the other party. Other party who does not have the information, they would be wary that because since they do not have the information whether to go for the transfer or not. So through the process of patenting, this problem of information asymmetry can be sorted, and the differences in the protection regime will influence whether the market will be facilitated through that or not. Another aspect we have discussed with respect to patent already is the industry specificity. Here also you will find that in case of chemical, in case of a pharmaceutical sector, a lot more licensing is supported through the patents, and the cross licensing also happens as such. Now in this case, particularly when you are talking about appropriation through licensing, it has been pointed in the research that it works best when there exists a substantial or a huge gap between the replication and the imitation cost. That means if suppose the technology is very easy to replicate and transfer, but it is very difficult to imitate, right? Then the innovator will be able to capture the larger part of rents by licensing it, right? On the other hand, this imitation is rather easy, then they would rather be very wary or will not be forthcoming in order to transfer that. So the gap or the difference between them, that is the replication cost and the imitation cost. Replication cost means you'll be able to tell the other party how to produce it, how to do it, but there might be certain tacit information which may still remain with you, and as a result imitating may not be very much easy. Moreover, imitation will become much more difficult once you align it with the appropriability regime that is available in the economy. So these are the important factors which will come into play when we will talk about whether how patenting will facilitate the technology transfer. So one is that, again, information paradox, which we already highlighted through the asymmetry of information. Because of the IP, it gets resolved. That means it is easier now for each party to come forward and discuss. Moreover, once the patent has been granted, anybody can, go to the individual patent office website, can look at the details of that patent, and they can be very sure about what this particular document is talking about. Moreover, the grant of the patent will also signal to the other party about the novelty of the technology, so their chances of having a doubt about the working or non-working would be rather limited. So it will help in resolving the asymmetry of the information which is there in this specific market. Apart from that, when we look at licensing, the agreement between owner of IP and the firm which is willing to pay a lump sum. So this is the kind of an agreement which would be made into, and the agreement may in fact engage either a payment of a lump sum amount or a certain amount of royalties in order to make use and sell the product. Here we will talk about technology licensing. That means if that happens, then the ownership still remains with the patent holder. On the other hand, with the transfer, what will happen? The ownership will now be shifted to the other party. So licensing in that sense will retain the ownership with the patent owner as such. So there are different things which has been talked about here: licensing in, licensing out, cross licensing. Cross licensing we have already discussed in details because we looked at the example of the smartphone and how different patents are engaged in it, and then how companies, the need of the hour is to actually come together and do that. Apart from that, licensing out, there has been studies which have kind of pointed out that maybe because Apple did lose out on the opportunity to make the Mac OS as an operating OS as an industry standard because they refused to license the technology. They wanted to keep it as a core. So you now see that a lot more competition coming into the market. Then there's another example of AstraZeneca which talks about licensing in. So what happened in early 2023, the pharmaceutical company, it actually licensed something called CMG 901, which was a phase 1 clinical stage antibody drug, and for treating some solid tumor essentially related to gastric cancer. And they were licensing in from a company called KYM Biosciences, which is a China-based biotechnology firm. So under the licensing agreement, AstraZeneca, they were essentially responsible for the global research and development and manufacturing, commercialization of the drug. It was pointed out by them, by the senior vice president of the biological engineering and oncology targeted delivery and oncology R&D at AstraZeneca by Ms. Pooja at that time, that CMG 901, it will in fact strengthen our growing pipeline of antibody drug conjugates and support our ambition to expand treatment options and transfer outcomes for patients and gastrointestinal cancer. So in this agreement, clearly the licensing in licensor would be AstraZeneca and the licensing out would be your KYM, right? And the licensing of the product is, as I pointed out, is towards the AstraZeneca as such. So these kind of deals are popular, and they will allow one company to take, kind of support from the other company and build in the specific area or a profile in which they are focusing on. So licensing in, cross licensing, licensing out are some of the major ways through which the companies interact with each other, will support the technology transfers and build on their existing portfolios. Point we will also talk about. We have, if you remember in discussion on national innovation system, we have highlighted the role of the universities. Here again we have identified universities as a major place where the knowledge creation happens. So now from an industry point of view, and given the very science based areas of industry, we have to understand that the continuous engagement with the universities will happen. And how will that happen? That will again through the various type of agreements that might be entered into. And technology transfer from academia to industry is then a very important case to be understood. So when you look at that from a point of view of industry, they know that the knowledge is the main competition in the market, and there might be companies which are coming from academia, which are again once again posing them the competition. A newspaper article in India Today pointed out that maybe from IIT Madras more than 100 companies have come up in which the faculty members are also engaged. So companies are also coming from academia as such. From academia point of view, again, the investment which comes from private sector is very important, because we realize that the public fund from the countries are rather limited, and if they want to allot them, there is a possibility that they might be more interested in healthcare, primary education, poverty alleviation, etc. So the allocation to academic institutions in terms of research may be rather limited. So the private sector can be identified as a major source from which the funding in research and development can happen. Moreover, over a period of a time, we have also studied that evolution in terms of the different universities over a period of a time, and how their engagement has varied over a period of a time with respect to the society. And nowadays, it's very clear that society expects much more from these academic institutions, rather than something being an ivory tower and being isolated from the problems of the society as such. So there is an expectation that the societal problem will be rather addressed by the research which happens in the universities and academic institutions. Moreover, now we also have a precedence. We have examples coming from like Silicon Valley. When we talk about the role of universities in regional development, we did highlight different cases where we have seen this kind of an intense collaboration coming forward. And clearly there is also a motivation which we have talked about, is how academia is now kind of incentivized to go forward and patent the new technologies which they are bringing forward. So then that means from the academic point of view, the interaction between the industry will entail technology transfer. That means their licensing would has to be done, disclosure has to be done with respect to the particular technology, patents which they are filing, they are being granted to the academic institutions. Now they have to be licensed as such. Like I said earlier, research sports, many times it may happen that certain projects may actually come forward as a collaboration between industry and university. Then you have to find out then what would be the IP and technology transfer related agreement. So that kind of a cooperative research, so contract research with individual investigators, consultancy, group arrangement, they will address the specific need of the industry. Apart from that, there could be a knowledge transfer, cooperative education, curriculum development, personal exchange, extending to research consortia, co-authoring research papers, and employing the university graduates. So those knowledge transfer interactions are also existing. So publication, patenting and licensing, spin-offs are various cases where you see that now that there has been interaction of industry and academia, and there are clearly different concerns. For instance, in case of publication, we have earlier pointed out that industry may not be very keen on publishing their result very fast. In fact, what they may want is to kind of keep it with themselves for some time until and unless it actually reaches an application stage, and they may want to come up with the commercial output much faster. On the other hand, academia would be more interested in publishing and become the first to in the amongst their peer to do that. Then with respect to patenting and licensing, clearly there are challenges with respect to patenting. We have talked about to do or not, exclusive versus non-exclusive pricing. These points we have already discussed. But one thing is to be made clear that when we talk about this, patenting will actually facilitate the transfers from the academic institutions to the industry. Why? First of all, it will give a signal to the industry that a patent has been granted. That means it meets the three criteria. The criteria of patentability, including newness and novelty and your industrial application. And if it does meet those criteria, that means there is a potential in it, right? So the information asymmetry that is particularly faced here can be sorted out. So then it will facilitate. But again, we have already talked about the challenges in terms of increase in the prices, particularly when we are talking about public funded research. The another type of interaction happens through the spin-off. Now here what you find is that domestic companies, they are using the technology which is now being created through the your universities, and many a times spin-offs, as an example of taking the technology from university to masses, is supported in cases where there is a drastic innovation, where you may find that not many industry may come forward in order to produce the product, or the essentially there is a lack of complementary assets and the knowledge as such. But what we have also find that there is also a high mortality rate, that after leaving it for certain times, either the company may not continue or they might be absorbed by another big company. So with respect to spin-offs, clearly we have to, one positive advantage or one positive factor is that it will ensure that a domestic company would be using the technology. Whenever you will find that another partner or industry may be rather to vary, or you can say that they are very risk averse to go ahead with that. In that case, the idea would be either taken by through their own companies. Then again, the lack of complementary asset and the business knowledge will influence the choice between whether you want to do it in-house, whether you want to license it, and etc. And if there is a lack of complementary asset, clearly you will be looking forward to having a partner. Then in terms of mortality rate, we have been found that some of the company may not sustain over a period of time. Next, when we talk about the type of technology that will be transferred, clearly it could be either a core technology, or it could be at a different stages of the technology development. So core technology, when we are talking about, is essentially something which will be make a part of the very core of that particular industry. And in case of certain advancements that happen from academia, clearly industry would be more interested in taking over it. But apart from that, when you talk from transfer from academic institutions to the industry, what you realize that there are different stages of the technological development. So you talk about something like a technology readiness level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. There the idea is whether the idea is only an ideation stage, whether the prototype is ready, or whether so the two extremes, or whether in some in between works has also been done. So depending upon the development stage, you will find that industry would be either coming forward to engage with the academia to take over that particular technology. Now, one thing is very clear, that industry and academic interaction has increased over a period of a time. It has also been supported, or rather you say given a boost, because of the type of products which we are now looking in the modern economies. That requires that institutional requirement is being created at the university level in order to facilitate these kind of activities. So what we are looking at may be a kind of a national policy on intellectual property and academia industry transfer, which will give a model, or you can say which will give them some kind of a guidelines to the academic institutions, where you find that how to go about these kind of a transfer. In case of India, we have such model policy. Apart from that, the universities and academic institutions are also expected to come up with their IP policy, which will then facilitate the individual faculty member, will make the things clear to them, and then the technology transfer offices. So technology transfer offices, the idea there is that they will provide administrative support for technology transfer. They will help them in filing patents, because certain amount of expertise is needed, and that expertise can be housed in that particular office. Then, of course, most importantly, marketing of technology. How would industry know that these kind of technologies are available with this particular institution? Establishing the links, helping in creation and supporting the spin-offs. So one can identify it as a central body which which will handle all the issues related to transfer of technology and will in fact make it possible to professionalize the entire IIT activities within a particular institution. It will also help the universities in kind of enhancing their bargaining power with respect to the industry as such. Next, we talk about international technology transfer. Now, this concept of international technology transfer became very popular towards the end of 1960s, and a lot more discussion began in 1970s. And here the idea was that if you see at that point of time, most of the technologies sources were rather concentrated in few countries, and within those few countries in few companies. So then the issue is that on the other hand, you have this, at that time referred to as a third world, and which very you can say desperately need access to these technologies given the challenges it was facing with respect to poverty and hunger, and so they need access to this technology and how it can be transferred. So then in this context, a lot more discussion, a lot more literature actually engages with the international technology transfer. If you remember, we have had a long discussion on multinational enterprises, and those multinational enterprises in that context were identified as the carriers of this kind of a technology from, let us say, one end of the world to the another end. So we will look at that particular aspect and we will discuss it more. So then we talk about technology transfer, core versus peripheral, explicit versus tacit, direct versus indirect. So we have already discussed about some of them, the core versus peripheral, explicit versus tacit. We will go forward and we will understand them more. So what are the different channels of the technology transfer? Maskus in his paper has pointed out that there are essentially market mediated mechanisms or the non-market mechanisms. So market mediated, which effectively means there is a formal transaction underlying it. For example, in case of trade, foreign direct investment, licensing, joint ventures. So the companies will come together. They will either get into a venture, licensing agreement will be formulated, or the final, in terms of foreign direct investment, a company will register into the other country, or they will undertake trade. That means they will identify a distribution partner in the other country. So all these four are being identified as a formal transactions which will happen. Apart from that, there are non-market mechanisms which may not actually involve any kind of a transaction. So that may include something like an imitation of the technology, departure of employees from one place to the another. Bangalore cluster, we did talk about IBM case and how when IBM left, then the employees were now being, either employed in the other companies or they started their own ventures at that point of a time. Then data which is contained in the patent application is also an important source of non-market mechanism. Test data if it is made available. If there is a temporary migration, people move from one country to another. So these are the non-market mechanisms through which the technology transfer does happen. The focus for our discussion will be the market mediated mechanisms. For this, we will also look at the definition of technology transfer, because now we are not looking at it in the context of a country but internationally. So broadly speaking, we are talking about technology transfer is also, like we will discussed earlier, transferring of the prototypes or of a licensing, etc. But it is also important to distinguish it from another very popular word called technology diffusion. Now, when you talk about technology diffusion, here you will see that these are the first of all adaptation or absorption of the technology in the overall economy, and it needs to be seen differently because it many a times also being talked about in spillovers. So there are in sometimes these words are used interchangeably. So we are talking about technology transfer through these channels of the market mediated one, and technology diffusion is being seen as something which is different from the technology transfer and which is effectively additional benefit that may accrue to an economy from such technology transfer, very closely related to the concept of the spillovers. And you will find that in case of a spillovers, apart from the technology transfer which happened, there may be other benefit. For example, if the foreign companies are doing something differently, now domestic company will learn from that. There is an example of one developing country where it was realized that many a times the labor was not coming on a time and there were issues regarding punctuality. So one international company, when it started its operations there, they started offering a breakfast. As a result, you'll find that most people were coming on time. Again, the other companies will begin to kind of use the similar kind of techniques or management innovation. So you find that then there would be a learning through seeing, learning through interacting, and kind of maybe, as we said earlier, transfer of employees, etc. So those benefits we are not talking about. We are talking about this market mediated channel through which the technology transfer happen, in which multinational enterprises are being seen as a major players. So here we need to define something called a mode. So what is this mode? Mode effectively refers to the transfer link between the phases of the technology development chains of the transferer and transferee. So the TT modes can be classified under 4 main groups: sale intensive, manufacturing intensive, development intensive, research intensive. So let us look at them. So sale intensive, there you suppose we are talking about the transferee as a transferer as a multinational enterprises, and transferee you can understand as a host economy, but within that host economy you may have to identify somebody who would be doing the work, maybe a domestic firm. From a sale intensive point of view, the agreement will be effectively related to the sale of the particular product or of the service. So you have to identify an agent or a sole distributor who would do that. So you can link it to the behavior of an international enterprise or a multinational enterprise in terms of merely exporting the product. The another one is manufacturing intensive. Here maybe some kind of a subcontracting or arrangement is being made. A subsidiary comes into picture. A wholly owned subsidiary could also come into picture. They can engage with the original equipment manufacturer, can give licensing for the production of that particular let us say IP or some other medicine, or they can get into a joint venture. The idea there would be more intention towards the manufacturing, towards the production. Apart from that, there could be development intensive also. Maybe coming like on a joint venture with the other players which are in the same area but are domestic to the host economy, and they want to get into some kind of a development collaboration, development of a final product as such, or maybe engaging with the original design manufacturing. They might be sourcing, or international company is sourcing that kind of a product, but they want to get engaged with the design of it or something like that, or licensing it as well. When it comes to manufacturing intensive and development intensive, you may find that there might be a lot of overlap as such, and we will understand it in terms of the maybe a joint venture or through a investment which undertake place, like we talked about the foreign direct investment and internalization case of a case. Research intensive, where international companies might get engaged into research and development activities through joint venture or establishing centers with the universities, etc. So now when you look at it, putting it in a very the way which we have done earlier, so exporting or selling, we also looked at this from the point of view of the composition of foreign direct investment earlier. So exporting or selling, licensing, joint venture, subsidiaries, right? Now, what kind of a resource commitment would be required from the point of view of a multinational enterprises when they are engaging in these different modes? So, in case of exporting and selling, clearly engagement in terms of physical resources commitment, human resource commitment, organizational commitment are going to be rather low. Right? So they have to identify a partner, and that partner distributor would rather take care of most of the things. So physical resource commitment, the human resource commitment, and organizational resource commitment are going to be rather limited. On the other hand, when you talk about establishing a subsidiary, let's take a case of a wholly owned subsidiary. Clearly, the engagement capital resource is going to be very much, maybe they have to bring in some people who are working in the headquarters and then make them work in the particular economy. Then again, organization also has to be established. So all the resource commitment towards the physical, human and organization are going to be very high. On the other hand, when you look at a case of a joint venture and a licensing, you will find that there is going to be a mixed kind of a commitment. For example, in licensing, you will find that the organizational and physical would be rather limited. Why? Because the company is not required to do anything in the host economy, but there might be a mild or a medium level engagement with the human capital. If you are, kind of asking the other company to, produce their product and licensing it to them, it is required that so at some point it is possible that you may have to send some personnel from your home country to the transferor in order to support the adoption of the particular technology that has been licensed. In case of joint venture, you will find that there would be a medium level engagement of the physical resources and the organizational resources. There is a possibility in terms of a human resource, there might be once again a huge investments or maybe involvement. Now you have to understand, like we have already said, that we are understanding these transfers in the context of the companies located maybe in the developed economies and then supporting their activities in the developing economies. So if that happens, with the assumption that you may find more, trained or skilled labor in the developed economies, you may want them to come to the other economies and their, maybe the organizations that they're setting up it in the other countries now and get engaged with the human resource there. So clearly there might be a more involvement in terms of the researchers, scientists. They also have to come to the host economy, learn the specific characteristics of that host economy in order to find solution. They can learn that only through the collaboration that they may build with the host economy scientists and researchers. So that engagement, that interaction would be rather large. Now why these things become important is, from the point of view of the host economy, you will realize that a high engagement or high resource commitment from physical, human and organizational point of view will effectively mean more or a better transfer of a technology, right? So, but from a point of view of the now transferor, what would be of a concern? The concern would be how strongly they will be able to control the particular technology and what kind of authority they would be able to impose on the operational and the strategic decision making. They would want to do it the maximum, right? So we will realize that in case of exporting and selling, the control would be high, and it would be rather high also in case if you are having a subsidiary. But if you are merely licensing it to the third party, the control, what do you mean by control? Like I said earlier, operational and strategic decision making, the kind of authority the multinational may have over that. So it is going to be rather low in case of licensing, high in case of exporting and selling, and highest and also high in case of a subsidiary. In case of a joint venture, it would be at a medium level. The another major concern from the point of view of the company which is now transferring would be the dissemination risk, because dissemination would effectively mean that over a period of a time you are going to create your own rivals. That is a possibility, particularly if you are dealing with the horizontal technology transfer. So they will find that in case of an exporting, the dissemination risk is rather low, and in case of joint venture, it is medium. Dissemination risk is maximum or highest when we are talking about from the licensing point of view. You may ask the company to kind of do the production. They will learn about how it works out, and as a result, they will learn better about the technology. In case of an exporting, what will happen? You will be merely producing in the home economy, and then will be simply sending it to the other party. Whereas in case of a licensing, there would be a more engagement of the third or the other party as such. In case of a joint venture, once again there would be a engagement of the other party and the potential for those people to learn from you and then kind of engage with them. Clearly, if you have your own subsidiary, it is possible to keep the technology much close to the heart, and the dissemination risk can be, in that sense, can be reduced. It could be lower as such. In case of joint venture, once again you will find that the characteristics of the local firm will also become very important. But as we have said earlier also, that in case of joint venture, finding the right partner, spending on the search cost and other transaction cost is going to be of immense importance for the multinational. Then we are talking about the technology type. There also you will see that whether the transfer would be preferred or not. Here you will see that if the technology we are talking about is more tacit, right, then what mode would be preferred? If more tacit information is included, then clearly subsidiary would be rather preferred. Why? Because if you have this kind of a tacit knowledge, as we said, a non-verbalized, intuitive, unarticulated knowledge, which is very hard to transfer, then clearly engagement of your own subsidiary, with your own company, establishing your own plant in order to make use of that will be much more preferred. On the other hand, if the tacit knowledge is less, then the licensing would be preferred. It will be a joint venture would be marginally preferred, because it may require that you would have to now transfer it as such. So if the knowledge is more codified, that means there are proper written documents, there are manuals which are available, clearly licensing would be an easier choice to go forward. So now, when we're talking about this international technology transfer, and in that case of the role of the multinational enterprises, like we have said earlier, the environmental factors on the host economy will be very important. Right? Particularly with respect to the geographical distance, what are the technical capabilities of the host economy, cultural distances, which will in fact ensure the absorption of the particular product in the host economy. Then we can also see that transfer will also be depending upon the characteristics. Why? Because the choice mode we have just now talked about, that if we are looking at a case of a technology which has more tacit knowledge, then more internalization option, that FDI would be preferred. So technology characteristics will have a very important impact on the mode which would be now preferred. More internalization, that means more going towards the foreign direct investment or establishing your subsidiary or a wholly owned subsidiary will be preferred if the technology they are talking about is newer, if it has earlier very few examples of the previous transfers, if again the technologies is not very far away from the main business line of the company, because they would want to keep the core technology close, and if for the transferors with very little experience of the transfer earlier would also impact their final choice that they will be making. If the company is not used to giving licenses to the other companies, then they would rather prefer to do it on their own. Moreover, the characteristics of the technology supplier will also play a very important role. If the technology supplier has a wide variety of the products and they are much more diversified, then they will say that they can be, maybe go for the licensing as such. On the other hand, moreover, if they have more experiences with respect to the other countries, then they will see that maybe wholly owned subsidiary would be much more better. On the other hand, if they are distant, the affiliates businesses from the parent's core business, then clearly a licensing would be a better choice. So what we are trying to highlight here is that when we talk about the international technology transfer and the gains that will happen from the host country point of view, clearly they would want that the technology which is now coming through these channels of multinational enterprises should become more available into their domestic firms. Clearly, you will find that in order to attract that, environmental factors will play a role, technology collectors will also play a role, what are the characters of the technology supplier will also play a role as such. But the question which remains is that how can government support that? We have saying that maybe creating an appropriate environmental factor, and if we go to our earlier OLI theory by Dunning, the location related aspects are something which can help and support the host economy's efforts towards attracting such kind of investments. So when you talk about technology transfer and government policies, you will find that broadly there can be take two approaches. Either they can take a market approach, that means to facilitate the market. On the other hand, they can induce these kind of a technology transfer. So what will happen there? So there, if you take the market approach, you see that the markets will neither arise nor function in a vacuum, right? They will require some kind of a supporting infrastructure, maybe physical infrastructure. You also need institutional and policies infrastructure related to law, legal setting, norms, standards, rules of the game, etc., right? So there, when you are taking a market approach, you may not interact directly with a technology supplier, but the focus of the government in that case would be to create an environment whereby the market transactions are now being supported, right? So you are creating supporting institutions like standard setting, technology traders, portals, IPRs, competition policy, etc. And the idea is to strengthen the supply side, minimize the transaction cost, human capital formation will further support, domestic enterprise development will also support, cluster promotion, encouraging link between industry research, strengthening physical environment, right? And ensuring that both the parties which are entering into the transaction in a market has a similar level of stature in terms of the interaction. The moment one party would have an upper hand, you will realize that there would be challenges in terms of establishing the bargaining. So the power. So what we are looking at is creating a supportive environment for the market to develop for the technology transfer. On the other hand, there could be a different approach where through the technology and innovation policy, you identify the specific areas in which the research should be conducted. You may attract foreign universities to come have their campuses in India. Or you can attract foreign companies to come and set up their research and development, parks or research and development centers as such. Then this government-induced technology transfer will become an overall it will become a part of their overall development strategy, right? You have to understand what is their industry policy, what is their trade policy, and within that, how the technology and innovation policy is designed. Here you will find that more things will come at a play. So when we will talk about science, technology and innovation policy, we will look at the narrow approach towards the government intervention with respect to science, technology and innovation vis-a-vis a broader approach, and then we will be able to understand these different types of strategies that might be engaged in that. However, the underlying rationale for this approach is basically to identify that when it comes to the international technology transfer via maybe a multinational enterprises or through these collaboration activities, our domestic players might be at a disadvantage. They may and apart from that, there is asymmetry of information, and we have to deal with that through a positive direct intervention instead of a way in an earlier case where the focus was creating a market environment to support the market activities as such. So with this, we will finish our discussion on technology transfer and also on the market for technology.